Hey folks, welcome back to the DarkHorse Podcast Livestream Q&A 138. We are ready to both rock and roll. So without further ado,
we're going to do it. We're going to be a bit brief today, which is a shame because there are a ton of good questions.
Brief
today.
Without being terse or curt. That's my objective.
Well, let's see if you meet it.
I already have a bad feeling about that, but we'll see.
Okay. It was a two-way tie this week for the Discord question because there are so many good questions elsewhere. I'm only going to go with one. I'm just going to go with the first one. Although I think we've addressed this other times. What is the evolutionary explanation for what is called ADHD? I have a daughter with a diagnosis, and after reading up on the matter, the second D in ADHD seems like a reach from an evolutionary perspective. That is to say, disorder, right? I'd love an evolutionary viewpoint on the matter from a professional. Yeah, we have talked about it. We've talked about a number of these so-called disorders that are medicalized, that are treated with for-profit pharmaceuticals, and that are likely both at the end or near the end of some naturally occurring continuum, which had some reason to exist in a time before hypernovelty was so pervasive. And also there are likely to be, for this as with some of these other things, reasons for an increasing prevalence now.
Yeah, my guess would be that there is a pathology and that pharma has, recognizing its interests in selling more drugs, basically taken a pathology that is real and narrow and may or may not be successfully treated with a drug over which they have intellectual property rights, but that one could plausibly increase the number of people who have it by correcting the definition in a particular way. And so my guess would be most people who have ADHD are really suffering the failure of the system to deliver a suitably enriching environment of the sort any ancestor until very recently would have had. Mm-hmm. And so anyway, you've got a system that's broken in terms of it providing something meaningful and rewarding for a child to do that it would want to do. And in the absence of that, you see a pathological manifestation, but it's really the environment failing, not the kid. That said, there could be individuals for whom that's not true. And this, very often it'll be, if you take any sufficiently powerful drug with cognitive impacts, it will disrupt a system. So if you've got somebody who's more active than they should be, and you dump some drug that's different, it will put them into, hey, that's different mode. And so you can then run an experiment and say, does this particular compound have a positive effect on hyperactivity? Well, it changed that child's behavior. And the point is, well, did that change last? Or did they just simply accommodate the drug and then go back to being the way they were? Anyway, something along those lines.
Well, and I guess I object, and we read about this in the book as well. I object to the idea of should be. And I know that you use that term within the context as it is used by modern medicine and pharmaceutical industry. But the idea that children should be able to sit still, facing forward and not move except when called upon, or, when they've raised their...
That's weird.
That's very weird. Hey, Zach, you want to put us both back on screen? Okay. Now you guys know more about the way our cameras are set up.
Yes, you do.
So the idea that the school situation, which is generally the realm in which it comes to the attention of parents, that the teachers just cannot navigate this with this child who will not sit still, is anything like an environment which children have had exposure to before, or really is something that children should be expected to endure, is itself, I'd say, erroneous. So we also see, it's interesting, the person who wrote the question, I think, said it was her daughter. I'm imagining her, but it was a daughter who's been diagnosed with this. And this is a pretty sex stereotyped diagnosis. In general, the girls get diagnosed diagnosed with anxiety and neuroses and get the drugs for that. And the boys get diagnosed with the ADHD and get the drugs for that, which is to say mostly speed. And, boys are more likely to be fidgeting, and they're more likely to need to be learning through actually, bodily interface with the world as opposed to taking things in entirely in the abstract. And that doesn't mean that is not the same thing as saying, therefore, all boys need to be medicated. Unless what your goal is we are going to create an environment and it's going to maximize it's going to make the largest student to teacher ratio possible with as few not particularly well-trained teachers as possible. Not to say that there aren't some amazing teachers out there, but we want to be able to have maximize profits and minimize the confusion in the classroom. Well, we're going to do that by making all the children be most likely to be compliant, complacent, and quiet. And that is more likely to be more like a girl style of being than a boy style of being. And so if that's your goal, then the environment in which you're trying to get those kids to behave, you've automatically basically made at least half of the population of your classrooms non-compliant and therefore at risk of being drugged into compliance.
Yeah, I of course agree with all of that, but have some desire to defend myself against a possible interpretation. When I say should, that is a very careful theoretician self-defined should. In other words, I'm not imbuing the powers that structure these environments with any right to say whether the child is too active. But what I'm saying is that there's some physiologically right level of activity, and that a person might indeed have a disorder that would cause them to be outside of whatever the optimal activity level was. And, by analogy,
they might have restless nose syndrome, for instance.
I have had that one myself. But by analogy, if I say, when a person's temperature is too high, right? This is obviously a reductio ad absurdum, but a person could say, well, who are you to say what's too high? And the answer is, well, I'm not saying it's 98.6 is the right temperature, but I'm saying that a temperature can be so high that you can't function. That's too high. And so it is possible that there are kids whose activity level, through whatever process modulates this, are really too active for their own good.
I think that's likely true. And I think it is, as with all of these things, a tiny, tiny, tiny fraction of the people who are actually being medicated into submission.
I agree. That's why I started
just like you and I will say, trans is real and extraordinarily rare. Anxiety, crippling anxiety is real and on the rise for, because of what's going on. But, much more rare than the number of people on the anti-anxiety drugs would suggest. And the same thing with the idea of hyperactivity. How about stop taking recess away and stop letting kids be safe by parking them in front of screens and actually enforce them going outside and running around and getting dirty and, getting themselves into little scrapes and scuffs, and then see how hyperactive they are for the however many hours a day you expect them to sit still and listen to someone drone on about gender ideology or whatever the hell is going on in schools.
Yeah, I agree. That's why the game of pharma is always, you own a molecule, you're looking for a plausible reason to deploy it, and then you're looking for the broadest definition over which it can be deployed, right? It's a game. It has nothing to do with making people better off. Doesn't mean that these things don't often start with an actual pathology. And then the question is, well, what molecules in the neighborhood and how broad can we make the definition?
Mm-hmm. First question from DarkHorseSubmissions.com this week. Throughout high school, my cousin has done very well making money on his own from various business initiatives. Do you think it's worthwhile for him to get a business degree? Should he do something else? Thanks. Love you guys. There's a lot of specifics that we don't know anything about yet here in this question. But in general, I would say, a business degree, especially if you're talking about an undergraduate business degree, has, at least historically, very little value. And I don't see any reason to think that that's changing now.
Well, and what's more, the person, as described, has proven that they are in a good position to teach themselves. And so really the question from the point of view of a degree is, A, is the degree, does it contain stuff of value
that you cannot teach yourself?
Well, it could be that it's compromised like everything else,
right.
And that what you're going to learn is the opposite of true. But even assuming that what you learn with a business degree is true and practical, there's a question about whether an individual needs it, because, as you point out, a lot of this stuff is accessible online somewhere. And if you've already, proven that you can start a business, then it may be that all you need to do is supplement what you know with what you don't know and need to know by many, many online sources.
I mean, there's certainly a real set of skills to entrepreneurship. I don't see any inherent reason to think an undergraduate business degree is likely to give those to you. And I'm reminded this is in a different domain, but also in higher ed. I went into college wanting to be a writer, wanting to be a science fiction writer, and was a literature major. And this is back in the late 80s. And I quickly realized that the literature classes that I was in and the creative writing classes that I was in were not very interesting and were not valuable to me. And what I really wanted was the reading lists, and I didn't want to have to sit through the endless, ridiculous discussions of what we had read, because at least at that point in the school that I was in, those conversations seemed banal and uninspired, much less interesting than the similar conversations I'd had in high school, the high school that we met at in LA. But the way that I formalized my decision to actually go into science instead, which was something I'd always done and knew that I was good at, was that although I retained my desire to be a writer, I needed to have something to write about. And what I was seeing in the creative writing classes that I was in was that most of the short fiction that we were reading by each other, by my peers, weren't about anything, because these were kids like myself who hadn't lived, who had nothing to say. And so just as, in my experience, I thought, well, if I want to be a writer, I need something to write about. So I'm going to go into something that I'm also really interested in, which is going to afford me the ability to get places and meet people and live in places where I wouldn't otherwise go, and therefore have a lot of life experiences about which to write. I don't know exactly what the analogy is to business, but it seems like there is something there, which is to say, okay, going into business per se isn't itself all there is. What kind of business might you be interested in, and might therefore art history or biology or the law, for instance, be the right addition to your native talent in business. Now, all of that is said as if we have a system of higher ed that is functional, and of course we don't. And so, that how that advice changes in light of the fact that there is no good university to recommend for people at this point, at least in the US. I'm not sure, and I wish I did have a good answer. But I would say in general, if you're interested, if you have a demonstrated knack for being successful in business as a high schooler, I would say my temptation would be to find something else to become expert in that can help facilitate branching out into business of a particular sort.
Well, I agree with that, except that I think we know a lot about what isn't available in college anymore.
Yeah.
And to the extent that someone is a person who teaches themselves well and has skills in business, it's possible that the thing to do is to bypass the environment where they're going to teach you that men can magically become women and all of the other nonsense.
Yep.
And business is at least a real environment where you can guarantee yourself that you can learn by taking your understanding into the world and trying to turn it into a profit.
Mm-hmm. And if you've got a series of successes, you can learn from those. If you've got a series of failures, you can learn from those. And it's harder to convince yourself, if you fail, that you failed because someone was mean to you. Sometimes that will be the case. But if you fail over and over again, it's not because the world is out to get you, probably. It's probably because you're doing something wrong. Now that, of course, luck plays a role. But hopefully your cousin having done very well so far is not entirely due to luck.
Yeah.
Have you read The Real Anthony Fauci by Robert Kennedy Jr.? If so, what are your thoughts? Could things really be as bad and corrupt as the book claims? Thank you. Yes, I have. Yes, Bret has. Could things really be as bad and corrupt as the book claims? I'm afraid so. That was a tough book to read. Really, really hard. And one of the things I did as I read it was just spot checked the references. It is incredibly well referenced, as anyone who's held the book in their hands knows. If you just listen to it, you don't necessarily know that. But if you have it in your hands, it's typeset in a way that's it's actually a little hard to read because it's so jam-packed. Like the margins are tiny and it's just so jam-packed with references. So I didn't look at even 1 in 25 of those references, but every now and again, I would look at one that struck me as unusual or unlikely, or I did occasionally do a haphazard, like I'm just okay, let's check this one and see if it is what he claims. And doing that, which was, again, haphazard, I didn't find any errors, right? So it's incredibly well referenced, and a haphazard assessment of the references that back up the claims that he makes were valid. It is an extraordinary, what's the opposite of vindication?
Indictment.
Indictment. It's an extraordinary indictment of much of the modern medical and public health and pharmaceutical system, the likes about which we've been talking for 2.5 years and about which many people besides Robert Kennedy Jr. have been talking about. And I have also the silence with which the book was met was remarkable. I haven't heard anyone contest anything in the book. Probably some of that exists, but I haven't seen it. And certainly what seemed to be the response, maybe organized, maybe not, was ignore this, it will go away.
The other thing to say is if you look at what we actually do understand, what the evidence actually suggests about our COVID response, it is the inverse of the right response. The inverse is a very unlikely thing to settle upon unless complete corruption is the explanation. Right? It is possible to get a random response through incompetence. It is not possible to get the inverse of a good response. And so the portrait painted by the book is consistent with a system that misled, in the US, a system that misled 300 million people about the right way to respond to this virus and the nature of the virus. And so anyway, that kind of check also suggests a very dire situation. Yep,
that's all true. I will say, it's been a while, and I have notes. I'm not going to go into them now, but there are a couple of points. One of them middling, one of them small, where I thought it wasn't quite right. But they were not on primary points of the book. And again, I was reading it with as critical an eye as I could. It's very long. It's very dense. But I think maybe one was the characterization of the germ theory of disease, which I just didn't find quite as careful as it might have been. But I think that was the larger of the two. And again, it was just a characterization of a way of approaching how we understand medicine and science, rather than a claim of fact. None of the claims of fact that I tried to fact check proved to be wrong.
I cannot recall. There was one bit in it that I thought was slightly was beyond what the evidence actually suggested.
Okay.
And
it's been some months at this point.
I can't quite put it back together. But let's just say the book is so encyclopedic that the idea, it has an error and it's got a claim that's too strong.
How could it not?
Right.
That's no excuse, but a book this comprehensive and that had to have been written so quickly is going to have some places that are not quite a perfect match.
Given how much is in it, the fact that it almost entirely checks out is really quite extraordinary.
Yeah. Why can rocks work out while sleeping? Answers below. So this guy provides an answer below. Do you want to hear it now or do you want me to wait? Why can rocks work out while sleeping?
I don't have it.
Because they get in shape by flint napping. I wonder how chiseled they have gotten since you read part 1.
Terrible, and I would not have gotten there, though I'm kicking myself for that. But yeah, all right.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Congratulations, you're going to be a father.
Might icing an injury sacrifice long-term repair for short-term relief? Ice interrupts the body's inflammation process, which I assume is an adaptive one.
Yep.
You know, I was having exactly this thought this week, Connor. This is from Connor. And I've had it before, but I was thinking like, oh, you know, I could ice this pain. Like, no, I'm not going to ice the pain. And like often I arrive and I'm not going to ice it because I don't want to then feel the relief and go and hurt myself again.
Yeah.
Because we've been moving a lot of stuff around and we're just like, okay, just take it easy already. Let your body tell you what you're actually okay to do. But specifically, yes, even if you're not going to then push yourself, the little micro movements that your muscles have that they could engage in without the inflammation that the tissue was providing, might do further damage, might absolutely create a longer repair process and a more imperfect repair process. Yes.
Yeah, I've always been suspect about the ice for 24, then heat thereafter. It's possible that heat is beneficial because heat is expensive, so you could imagine that selection would have economized more than is ideal, that basically it could create a local fever, but it doesn't because of the cost, and that you could supplement by adding external heat. But it's hard to imagine why, look.
There's circumstances, there are certainly lineages of humans where cold would have been hard to come by under a lot of circumstances.
That is quite right. So the question then is, it's good, but impossible to source, so that our bias in favor of it is not there. That's quite likely.
Yeah.
Well, that is a likely pattern in light of the fact that cold is very hard to source almost anywhere. You go outside, but it's not cold enough to be useful. Yeah,
in the temperate zone at any time of year, if you're near fresh water, you can probably get your tissues colder than they are. But if you're in the tropics, any water is likely to be somewhat cold. But it's not going to be ice cold.
Well, but then that also introduces the same logic as heat.
Right.
If we are biased against adding
that's
heat,
why I was bringing it up. I think that both of these things our body might economize on.
You didn't say this part.
Okay.
You may have been thinking it. But let's say that cold is good. Your body does not say, oh, go out and find cold to apply to the injury. One reason, if let's say you injure your shoulder.
Yeah.
And you need to put it in cold water in order to get enough heat out of the system to get the benefit. Well, putting that much of you in cold water is going to burn a lot of calories to compensate you for the heat you're losing.
And you need to be doing healing. You need to conserve resources for healing.
Right. So it's possible that this is one of these cases like your tendency for your fingers to go numb in the cold that's just out of step with modernity, where you have plenty of energy available to add heat or cold.
Yeah.
That's possible.
Yeah.
That said, I do wonder whether the basic medical wisdom or lack thereof has been inflammation bad.
Right.
Now, maybe that inflammation is bad.
Well, there will be occasions, just like there will be children who are actually too hyperactive. Right. There will be occasions where inflammation, like, oh, actually, that inflammation is going to hurt you.
Well, wait a second.
That's out of control now.
Maybe inflammation is by definition bad, but swelling is not by definition inflammation.
I don't know. That sounds like a plausible semantic categorization, but I don't know if that's how they categorize those things.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't either. But my guess would be swelling is adaptive, and that inflammation may be inherently negative, but more limited than we think. And so we apply cold to deal with swelling on the basis that swelling is synonymous with inflammation, and it just isn't.
Yeah.
That'd be my guess.
Yeah, yeah, interesting. Yeah, I think that's right. Okay. Are polar bears white because evolution has selected... let me start again. Are polar bears white because evolution has selected for genes that make them white, or genes that make them the same color as their environment? So if the Arctic were purple, would polar bears be purple or extinct?
Well, I know how to test this, but it's going to take some time and a purple Arctic.
And damn the generation time on polar bears. It's going to be a long time.
Well, so here's the what information we do have. It is that the pigment that makes other bears not white has been selected against. So the pigment has a cost.
Actually, is this not true? Is it not the polar bears actually have no pigment, or is that a different white organism?
No, that polar bears are pigmentless.
Yeah.
So the point is something that produces pigment in a regular bear has been turned off, which is an economizing feature as well as a color changing feature.
Which in those bears where it was turned off, and those bears lived in, Idaho, that didn't work out so well for them.
Yeah.
So
anyway, the point is...
It's standard selection.
The point is standard selection, where the quickest path to matching this animal to its environment was actually turning off the pigment that was present in its ancestor.
And is it a kind of a simple toggle in this case? I think so. Yeah. So interesting that this particular story ends up being pretty simple at the genetic level. A simple, like on or off, and those bears where it toggles whichever way is, I guess, on is pigment. So it toggles off, and if you happen to live in a white landscape, like, hey, that worked out for me. Right. Now I now sneak up on seals more successfully.
You do?
Now that I'm white.
This has now gotten very dangerous. When did you become white, honey?
You always wanted a bear. You've been telling me that since we met.
Totally. I think. It's not as manageable as cats, but it's cooler in some ways.
Yeah.
Don't let him hear me say that.
Yeah.
Am I right? Am I remembering correctly that polar bear skin is dark under all of that translucent fur?
That would be my guess, but I actually don't know that I know the answer to that. Do you remember when our dog's nose molted?
Yes.
And it turns out that she had dark skin underneath all that blonde fur.
Yeah. She had
a pink nose, and then, I don't know, a year of age or so, it molted, and
it did.
She's got a dark nose now.
Yeah, she does have
what
a dark
happened?
Nose. But I think it is dark underneath, and which raises all kinds of questions. Why don't you see the darkness through the translucent? Why don't you see it through the translucent fur? I think the
presumably
answer is,
the fur is very thick.
Yes, and the amount of reflectance, the amount of white light scattered by the surface. But from the inside, a lot of light presumably penetrates, and the dark skin would accumulate the heat from it, which you would imagine a polar
So what
bear
does get through might not be able to get out. So you got sort of a greenhouse effect between the skin and the fur of the bear.
Yes, and for reasons that we are not going to explain because it would be far too complicated, that does not result in the bear just simply accumulating a lot of light so that if you were to cut one open, it would suddenly
reveal itself to be God.
Right, exactly. Right.
Oh, well, that was fun. Okay. And we don't know of any easy route to purple fur. So presumably that would have taken a lot longer if the Arctic happened to be purple.
Yeah.
Yeah. Everything would be different.
Yes.
Everything would be different.
And everybody in the Arctic would recognize that it had come from a bottle and that was not a naturally purple bear.
Yeah. Well, and that the Arctic wasn't naturally purple.
Right. Yes.
Yeah. Bottle purple bears. Okay. Is soil depletion from intense, this is from Echo, is soil depletion from intensive farming, cotton, soy, or corn, faster in deforested tropical soils? Are they more dependent on fertilizer? Love to you too. Yes.
100%.
Yeah, 100%. So I think we don't even need the intensive farming part, right? Like tropical soils on average have lower nutrient load to begin with than temperate soils. There are exceptions, volcanic regions being a big exception, right? Volcanic soils are very rich in nutrients, but in general, like the low, like jungles, the Amazon, but lowland tropical rainforests keep their nutrients in their seed banks rather than in their soils. And so, this is part of why, Swidden slash and burn agriculture works on small scale, because you grow, you burn the stuff that's on there. You leave the char. I'm going to do a terrible job of describing this. Basically, you till the nutrients that were growing on the soil into the soil, thus getting them in there so that you can grow your crops. And that lasts for, depending, 3, 5, 7 years, something. But then you got to move on because the soils are just depleted at that point. Yeah. And you go to an adjacent spot, and then you move to another one after 3 or 5 years, and you move to another one. And after, depending again on the precisely where you are and what's going on with your soils, let's call it 15 years, you can rotate back around to your original plot, which has had time to regenerate, if and only if population density is low enough that there was a lot of adjacent forest still to basically seed the new plot, such that there was good solid secondary growth already there that you can now swidden into the soil again.
So I'm curious about a couple of those estimates of time. It seems to me that 7 years is
too long. I think 7 is too long. I think 3 to 5 per plot. And then when I was looking at this, and I think this was from Central American Swidden agriculture, 15 to 20 years of cycling before you cycle back to an abandoned plot was about what. But again, it's going to be very particular to the place that you are.
Well, it's also subject. So you burn what's on it. You lose a lot of it as smoke.
Yeah.
So you don't get all the nutrients that were sitting on it. You only get a small amount. And the, 15 years, how much has regrown so that you can do that again, and the fraction that you recapture is enough, and how long do you get to grow on it? You haven't obviously regenerated a forest.
Right. It's young secondary. And what I don't know, and what I think is maybe at the heart of your question, is how many times can you do that?
Yeah.
Right. Like, so, that you would expect that the amount of time before you can come back to a plot gets longer every time.
Yeah.
And so, this only works if you've got intact forest right there that can reseed, and you don't have other people having been using that soil in the meantime.
Well, actually, I wonder about the reseeding issue. I mean, obviously that's an issue in general, but the question really is, a mature forest may be very low productivity, right? Mm-hmm. The trees may be growing very little and taking up all of the space.
The canopy, I think, but the understories,
but that's what I'm saying. Is once you've cut down the canopy trees, the secondary scrubby stuff may be highly productive.
Yeah, no, and I think
because it's highly productive, it may be that's where the 15 years comes from, because the amount that has accumulated in that time is more than trees would have put on at that time.
100%, yeah, because you don't. If memory serves. And probably, Connor maybe, but some ecologists may know off the top of their head better than I do. The sort of incomplete burning of wood into charcoal and trying to get that into the soil is going to have a different mix, a different ratio of nutrients than the fresh green stuff with a little bit of wood and like in the young growth. And in general, it takes more, and you're going to lose more to smoke to get wood. Charred enough to be able to turn into charcoal to dig into the soil. And so the newer stuff may actually be, it's certainly going to be easier to slash and burn. Yeah. And you're going to end up with soil that has less chunks in it, and you're going to have an easier time planting and growing around it. But, it's going to depend on what you're growing, what the soils look like, how often if they're ever flooded, that adds a totally different, question. If you're talking about annual floods, then you're not doing Swidden probably, like in some parts of the Amazon. But if you're talking about, this landscape tends to flood once every 10 years or so, well, where's it flooding from? And is it bringing in nutrients? Is it coming from, if you're talking about South America, is it coming from the Andes, which are volcanic? And so is it bringing in an influx of nutrients routinely? All of these things affect the answer. But is soil depletion from intensive farming faster in deforested tropical soils? The part of the question that's not written is then in deforested temperate soils. Yes, with all these caveats.
Yep.
Yeah. Are they more dependent on fertilizer? Yes. At least. Great. It's catching. It's not like that. Oh, okay. Can you run the thought experiment of China, the US, Musk, and Google all having an AGI strategy? All having AGI strategy advisors that can trivially outthink humans. What happens in the first weeks, months, and years?
Well, I mean, the setup to your question is so far from reality that, a lot would depend on the particulars. To what degree do these, one thing you could do to source your, or to refine the question so it's easier to get to an answer is they all sourced their AGIs from the same place. Because the problem is that what dominates your question the way you set it up is the difference between the AGI advisors.
Yep.
But if they were all the same because somebody discovered it and sold it to all sides, what would that do? And
then it's a question of how does what each of these entities is asking it to do, like that you've controlled for the other variables.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, unfortunately, you do need more variables out of the equation before this becomes tractable, because the various entities are presumably asking the AGI for different objectives.
Well, exactly. I was just going to say, like, what we don't have the initial ask here, which in a basic science question, like, what's the observation? Like, what in this thought experiment would China, the U.S., Musk, and Google be wanting from the output? Like, what is each of their goals? And if their goals are not related to one another, then the question becomes, like, how long do each of them go before they run into the other's process?
Well, you could do Google and Musk pretty easily, because Google presumably asks for a more concentrated form of evil, and Musk presumably asks for better memes, I would imagine.
Oh, not better flamethrowers? Or?
The use of flamethrowers in memes,
Yeah.
Possibly, but he wants more and better memes, and he wants them to get to Mars before anyone else's do.
The memes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. First to Mars.
Right.
Memes first to Mars.
Yeah.
China might care about that too, though. First memes to Mars.
First memes to Mars. I don't know that they're big on the memes. I mean, I think they're big on us being big on the memes because that keeps us from succeeding.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They want us to think that it's all about the memes.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, that was not an answer.
Is TikTok a warning that time's up for the West?
This is exactly why I thought China cares about the memes, but no, they want us to.
They want us to care about the memes. Yeah,
they do. Yes, that is exactly what TikTok is. Okay. So many good questions here. 5 hours. Oh, this is not a question. 5 hours. 5 hours ago. Probably at this point, 5 hours and 5 minutes ago. 5 hours ago, I saw the UPS guy make the drop. Since then, I've donned my Pfizer shirt. The breakthroughs never stop. Happy to be repping your cheeky anti-authoritarian apparel.
Hell yeah.
Thank you, militant moderate. Here's another just comment. Thank you, Bret and Heather. I've been compared to vermin and diseased by the unjabbed. When I listen to your podcast, I feel like my civil rights are intact, human again.
Yeah, the vermin thing.
Yeah.
It's a rough one.
Yeah. Is catching up on sleep a thing? If I sleep 4 hours the first night, then 12 the next, is that equivalent to sleeping 8 and 8? Why or why not? No.
Well, wait. Yes, catching up is a thing. No, it's not linear. And
you can't actually catch up.
We would have to define terms, but it is definitely true that you are compromised after not sleeping.
Yes.
And that you are rejuvenated by nights of sleep that are complete.
Yes, but that's not the question. If you sleep 4 and then you sleep 12, is that like sleeping 8 and 8?
No, nonlinear.
And the answer is, and again, I didn't see this coming, so I don't have the research at my fingertips, but there's some actually good sleep research happening now. And it, like much research, does tend towards the reductionist. And so there's tracking of, a few particular parts of the brain and things in the brain, but it seems that there are long-term effects from sleep deprivation, which just do not get made up. Even if you can't say, okay, if I need to sleep 56 hours in a week, I'm going to do that all on Friday and Saturday. It doesn't work that way.
No, you certainly can't get ahead, and I would not argue that you can fully regain. We know that there are negative health consequences from sleep deprivation, but the question is, if we were to measure just simple functionality. Right? Functionality degrades rapidly after having too little sleep. Mm-hmm. And the question is, does sleeping more compensate you, or is all you can do sleep the adequate amount and then you sort of outpace the deficit? And so I believe there's nothing wrong with the idea that there is some catching up you can do, but that you can't regain everything you lost.
You can't get caught up. You can't get caught up, but you can mitigate the damage.
Well, wait. No, these are two different things. You've got instantaneous functionality, right? How functional are you? It is not the case that if you have ever been sleep deprived, that you will be somewhat sleep deprived for the rest of your life.
No, there are apparently long-term effects on the brain.
I'm not arguing that there aren't. I'm arguing in terms of instantaneous functionality, how functional you are. Lack of sleep degrades your capacity to do, for example, math.
Yes.
Right? You can get back to baseline. It is not true that anybody...
At the instantaneous
the instantaneous level. You do not ever fully recover the damage that was done. There is long-term consequence from sleep deprivation that is not in that. But so the real question is, are you asking about the instantaneous well-being, or are you asking about the long-term damage? And the answer differs depending upon which one of those you're talking about.
No, I think that's a good framing. I think that makes sense. Someone says the sound pitch problems are across several platforms for several content providers. Also, Bret, get yourself a Catrike? Catrike?
What is a Catrike?
I don't know what a Catrike is. I don't know. Have you ever considered renaming your show Bret and Heather? That's what my partner and I have referred to you as for the last 2.5 years. Bret, is your cough an emunctory phenomenon? Your hip injury sheds waste that is using the prolongation of your cough to mechanically shed dead cells.
I do not believe so. I love the idea.
That's echo again.
Dead cells from my hip are leaving through my lungs. That seems like the long way around. Usually that would be...
Well, this is a new idea to me. I am... Two things.
Yeah.
You don't have a way out at your hip, right? No. Like you don't have an injury, you don't have a wound, a skin wound there. So right. there's no way out there. And I am thinking of this research that was done on frogs many years ago, in which I can't remember. I think what it was some researchers wanted to track frogs and put a subdermal tag in them. And they kept finding the frogs with no tags, and occasionally they'd find a tag, and it was just like out in the universe. And they'd be like, okay,
covered in frog poop.
They were actually not... No, I'm conflating two stories. The one that's relevant here is they got these frogs to, I hope I have this right, swallow these transponders so that they were with them for a while, but they were losing them, and they were actually not pooping them out. Their bodies were encasing them in stuff, and then they were emerging from their bodies. Oh. Yeah. Now frogs is different. Frogs their skin is a respiratory organ.
Frogs is different.
Frogs is different, and they only have 2 layers of skin to our 3. Like I wouldn't think that you could necessarily do that with your skin. You're not a frog.
I'm not a frog.
Okay, but I don't know necessarily how all the waste gets disposed of.
I mean, we know how the waste gets disposed of.
I mean, we know the 2 usual ways that we talk about.
No, but you got kidneys and liver, right? And the liver exports stuff to the gut, and the kidneys export stuff in the urine. So the question is, why on earth, unless this was something so ancient and resistant to refiguring by selection, the lungs is a terrible way to get rid of these things.
Yeah.
Right? Once you get it to the blood, the liver and the kidneys have a way to eliminate it.
Yeah.
If you export it to the lungs, you create a problem.
Apparently.
One that is interrupting of vital functions and inelegant as all hell. So the only way that makes any sense is if it's a holdover from some incredibly ancient ancestor. And I don't believe that that's likely.
Yeah. Interesting idea, though.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Is global warming falsifiable? Presumably, this person means anthropogenic global warming, because global warming, presumably, we're going to try to answer the question that I think you meant, which is anthropogenic climate change.
Yeah.
Global warming, it is or it isn't, and we have records.
Right.
And it depends on, maybe you can argue about where you want to count and how narrow and averages for regions, et cetera. But temperature is a simple quantitative measure. Anthropogenic climate change is tougher.
No.
It is tougher. Whether or not it's still falsifiable.
Whether or not. Good one.
No. Spelled differently.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is.
Okay, go for it.
Here's the thing. Falsifiability does not mean can you be certain that it is false or not. It means, do you have a prediction that is met or not? And is that prediction sufficiently narrow? Ideally, is it the prediction of only that hypothesis? All right, so there are better and worse predictions. But anthropogenic climate change predicts the retreat of the glaciers. Right? We can measure that. It is not a perfectly narrow prediction, because anthropogenic climate change is not the only thing that predicts the retreat of the glaciers.
Right.
But you could then say it should correlate with this measure, right? So then we get into the question of a model. And you could say, if anthropogenic climate change, then these parameters, which we are adding to the atmosphere, ought to correlate with the level of glacial retreat.
Yeah,
or the level of glacial expansion. So
there should be a number of variables that you have predicted will change in a particular direction.
Yep.
Climate change it sounds like it could be more wishy-washy, because it sounds like it's basically a two-tailed hypothesis now. It's like, oh, if it changes at all, then it's changed. Like, well, I don't think that that's the intention of those who renamed it from global warming, because the fact is that anthropogenic climate change predicts warming in some places and cooling in others. And that's just fine. There's nothing wrong, scientifically wrong or suspect about that. Like that, it's a complex system, the Earth, and it's gonna change in one way some places and another way others. But you got to be honest. You got to lay out what you predict is going to happen, and then keep track of whether or not those things happen over time. And hopefully you have 5, 10, 20, 40 measures that you have laid out and said, okay, I think it's going to go this way. And frankly, the direction of the change that you predict is more important in my mind than the scale of the change, than the magnitude of the change. And I'm not just saying that because, man, have they been off. Man, have many of the predictions been off with regard to the scale, but the direction still is looking the way the way the predictions have gone or have predicted. That said, non-anthropogenic climate change, I do not know well enough where the predictions differ between anthropogenic and non-anthropogenic climate change. And to me, that's the crux of the matter. Like that's what I want to see laid out very clearly so that I can have a sense of like, now I know what to look for with regard to falsifying one or the other.
Well, be that as it may, the basic problem with the question is that it imagines that falsification is a more direct process than it generally is.
Fair enough.
Is it falsifiable? Yes. Many of the things that we come to understand, we understand because predictions that do not test an entire model turn out either to be true or false.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is like any other. The model makes predictions. Some of the predictions overlap with non-anthropogenic climate change. Some of them do not. But is it testable? Is it falsifiable? Yes.
Yep.
Of course it is.
Okay. We've been going at it for a while, Zach.
Yep.
Just about an hour. Okay, let me pick up two more here quickly, and apologies for missing many of the questions. Is COVID over because midterms are coming up? No. If COVID is over because midterms are coming up, why are they hyping up monkeypox? What's the difference? Well, of course, there's an assumption built into the first part of the question.
Yeah.
I think COVID is over, which it's not. It in part because people were not going to put up anymore with as much shutdown going into the fall when things are likely to get ugly again, COVID-wise, as they, whoever they are, might have wanted.
Yeah, I would put it differently. I think we have substantially beaten expectations in blunting their propaganda campaign. And while the costs have been astronomical, their ability to sell that garbage is much lower than they had hoped because there were an awful lot of competent, courageous people ready to say, actually, this is my area of expertise, and here's why what they're telling you doesn't add up. And, I just don't think they expected it. So, one answer, and I don't know what the story is on monkeypox. I think there's some very conspicuous things about monkeypox being the next problem that make me wonder. But nonetheless, let's assume that this is just what it appears to be. The fact is, it is a new topic on which the score is reset, and the oracle and all of the things associated with it are in a much better position on a new topic than they are on a topic where they have been embarrassed again and again.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Okay. I'm forwarding a couple of these questions to our next session just so I don't lose all of them.
Yep.
But I'm going to do one more and then a comment. Do you have any thoughts on Rudolf Steiner's view on teaching children how the human being relates to the animal world via head, trunk, and limbs? How can I deepen this homeschool lesson? We love biology. So I went to this one not because I have an answer, because I don't know exactly what Steiner teaches on this front. But in general, I find Steiner's approach to education extraordinary. And he didn't. I don't know. Actually, I would have to go back and look. A few of these really remarkable educational thinkers from the early mid 20th century were either unaware of or explicitly un-evolutionary in their approaches, and that limited, I think, what they could do. I don't think that was the case for Steiner, but I'm not totally sure. So, if it feels, again, I don't know this. You haven't said enough here for me to know, or for either of us to know, unless you recognize what is being referred to here. Teaching children how the human being relates to the animal world. Basically, if you're talking via head, trunk, and limbs is what you've written here. If that is what it could sound like, which is basically finding the similarity And, more power too if you can talk about where the similarity is actually due to shared history and where the similarity is due to convergence. That's, fabulous. That's gravy. But absolutely, if you've got a cat or a dog, or just look outside at, squirrel or deer or something and say, okay, those 4 limbs are our 4 limbs and we use them for different things. And, we went upright and now we've got things that we call 2 feet and 2 hands, but it's the same origin, same history for those 4 limbs. That's fantastic.
Yep. I agree. I'd like to know more about what he taught.
Yeah. And then finally, this FYI. I submitted a Freedom of Information Act request to the NIAID, that's the agency at NIH that Fauci heads. I submitted a FOIA request to NIAID requesting all communications regarding ivermectin and COVID-19. I received 158 pages of completely redacted meeting notes.
Was there a lipstick mark on it, and did it appear to match Tony Fauci's lips?
Oh my God. Yeah. These are, I don't know. These are not serious times we live in. These are very serious times we live in, both of those things.
They're interesting.
Yeah, they are interesting. They're interesting. Okay. I think that's it for us for this week, guys. We will, again, Bret's conversation with Norman Fenton will be coming to you next week at this time, or at midday Saturday Pacific time next week, and then we will be back the following week for a full episode, Q&A, all that, and also by then we will be about to be doing our private Q&A, so we encourage you to come over to my Patreon and join and get access to our private Q&A, and come over to Bret's Patreon, and
if I can ask you a personal favor.
Yeah.
The algorithms do not they don't like it when we take a break. This is not a break that we want to take, but we're going to take it because we have to.
Our producer is going to be out of the country.
Yeah. So if you would do us a favor and circulate an episode, some clips, that would be great.
Yeah.
That would help to counteract the punitive instincts of the algorithm.
To say, oh, they're not here, they must be dead.
Right.
That's the story it tells. It's like what our dog thinks when we leave for a day.
Yeah, except in the case of YouTube, it's wishful thinking.
Yes.
And our dog would miss us.
Our dog would definitely miss us. She's so grateful that we're not dead every time we come in the door.
Yep,
that's true. YouTube, however, not so much.
No.
Damn, not dead yet. Nope, not dead yet, and not going to be next week either, but we won't be here. So we thank you for your support and encourage you always to be good to the ones you love, eat good food, and get outside.
Be well, everyone.